Well, welcome back, and welcome to those of you joining us for the first time. Welcome to all of you across Atlanta, across the country, around the world that are joining in with us. If you weren't with us last week, we kicked off this epic series with an epic story. And it's an epic story of Noah and the flood, and we talked about all sorts of things in this first part of this series to kind of step in the potholes or the obstacles that are out there. And if you weren't here last week, I encourage you to go back and check it out, because one of the things I wanted to lay out up front is that what we're not wrestling it with is the question, did it happen? It's a valid question. And it's a question people have been asking for a long time. Is this historical? Do people have concerns about that? It's not the question we're wrestling with. I'm going to talk about some things in this series that address this question, but it's not the main concern of this series. We're not asking, did it happen? We're asking, what does it mean? There's an extraordinary difference, a massive difference between understanding what happened and understanding what it means. You know, this is true in life. You can know all about what happened if you don't understand what something means. There's very little value in it. And this story is constructed in a brilliant way. In fact, we spent a lot of time last week carefully considering the literary context. We're trying to put on an ancient Near East mindset to look at the story and the structure of the narrative and the author's original intent. And one of the things we looked at last week is inherent in understanding this story is understanding the creation story. And we started with this last week. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but we talked about the floodwaters. And we talked about that's sort of a callback in this narrative to the creation story. If you remember in the beginning, when God created, at the very, very beginning, before God created anything, his spirit was hovering over the waters. And one of the very first things God did is he separated light from darkness, and he separated the waters, and he formed land in between the waters. And last week we talked about the fact that it was in this land where God, as he separated, that he began to expand and he began to create the world. And in the Genesis account, in Genesis 1 in the creation story, when it gets to the end of the creation story, 7 different times, God saw what had been created. He saw this transformation from the chaotic waters, which is what the waters symbolize in the beginning, into this order. And when he separated the waters into the land, he saw all that he had created that walked among the land, that inhabited the land, that grew on the land. He looked at it all and he saw it and he said it was good. You're gonna have to participate a little bit more than that today for me. He saw that it was good. And then he said, be fruitful and multiply. And his goal was that they would be fruitful and that they would multiply what was good, that their efforts would create more good. The fruit of their lives, the fruit of the world would be more good and multiply more good. And then we see a series of 4 stories, of which the flood story is the 4th. There's 4 stories, 4 significant stories where Eve and then Cain and then Lamech and then now these celestial beings, these fallen angels and the daughters of man, the women on the earth, how they engage in things that seemed good to them. Different than God. God saw what was good and he multiplied that. We said that God's a giver. He gave us the ability to multiply what is good. Now what's happening in the world is that man saw what seemed good to him and they took it. Different than God as a giver, man took it. And it resulted in Ra, or evil. This was the knowledge that opened up in the beginning when they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, Tov and Ra. And so what's happening now is the world is collapsing. We talked about this last week, and this is a new concept for a lot of us. This is why I bring it back. The world's actually collapsing. It's collapsing back in on itself. And what's happening in the world is that man's own desires, we said last week that this story is first and foremost a warning that God will give us over to our desires. And that's what he's doing. He gives the people over to their desires, and the world, the flood waters, the waters of the world, this is where we're gonna get to eventually in the story. They're collapsing back in on the world. And that chaos is coming back into the world and is disrupting and destroying the order that God created. And God, we saw in the story, he's not angry. God's grieved. And what he's actually doing, he's handing humanity back over to their desires. And what's happening is that catastrophe is inevitable. It's gotten worse and worse, and it went from just a human problem to a sort of a cosmic problem as some of his created beings in the heavens and on the earth are engaging in things that seem good to them. But instead of multiplying the good, the tov, they're multiplying the ra. Now, before the story ever introduces the ark or the flood, it poses this question. The question we looked at last week was, who gets to define what is good? This is sort of the big, broad, general question that we begin with, that the author of this narrative, it's very clear if you read it in context. The first question he's asking is, who gets to define what is good? And who gets to define what is good for you? Who possesses, this is the way we said it last week, who possesses decision rights for what is good for your life? Now today, we're gonna pick up right where we left off last week in the narrative. And we're gonna wrestle with a second question that we're confronted with in this ancient story. And we're gonna run right into it as we continue in this narrative. And just as a reminder, God's grieved because catastrophe is inevitable. He sees what's happening in the world as the world is collapsing in on itself. And God is grieved, but Noah, we see. Genesis chapter 6, verses 8, we started with the first 7 verses. Genesis chapter 6, verse 8, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. If you're still worried about whether God was angry or whether he was grieved, this is amazing. Noah, his name actually means to comfort or to console. So God's looking, he's searching the world, and his eyes, they rest on one. And he looks at him, and he looks favorable to God. And in some way, the author's trying to tell us this comforted. It consoled God to see Noah, because Noah, we're told, was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. And Noah walked with God. Now this is like shadows or echoes of the garden. And this is not to tell us that Noah was perfect. What this is telling us is Noah was a righteous man, meaning he tried to do right by God. That's what it means to be righteous, is to do right by God. You do right by someone by honoring who they are. You know this, who they are and who you are in relationship to them. This happens all the time. You do right by your boss by honoring who they are and who you are in relationship to them. You honor your parents by doing right by them. To both of my kids who are sitting on the front row, in honoring them in right relationship together. This happens between teammates. This happens between us and law enforcement and government officials. This is what it means to do right or to be righteous. That's what the author's trying to tell us. So God gives Noah instructions for how to prepare for what's coming. And he says this. He says, make yourself an ark. Make yourself an ark. Now, excuse me. I've been waiting for this moment. We haven't talked about the ark yet, but some of you know I like to draw. We're not gonna draw just yet. We're gonna get there. But I'm eager to draw. But ark is a unique word. It's actually not even a Hebrew word. Ark is a borrowed Egyptian word, and it's the word tabah. And this word tabah is a really interesting word. It's probably not what you think of when you think of the ark. In fact, the Hebrew word actually means chest or box or coffin. It's this borrowed Egyptian word, and again, it doesn't mean boat. In fact, the author could have used the word onia. Onia is the ancient word, Hebrew word for ship. And it's used in the Old Testament scriptures. He doesn't. He uses this word that sort of means it's like this treasure chest. It's this box. And it's not the same as the Ark of the Covenant, but as you're gonna see in a few minutes, there's actually a relationship. But this is seen if you look in ancient Egyptian literature. These boxes, these tabahs, they were found in all of the old ancient Egyptian temples. And they contained, check this out, this is so interesting. They contained images of gods. Images of God or images of the gods. That's what's in these boxes. And so he uses this word, and which, by the way, this word only is seen 2 times in the Old Testament. It's seen here in this story of Noah, and then anybody else know the other story? It's used one other time in the whole Bible. Anybody know? This is awesome. It's used in the story of Moses. When Moses' mother creates a basket, as it's translated in our Old Testament Bible. She creates this basket. It's the same word. It's a tabah. She creates a tabah for Moses to, and this is the operative word. The word that the writer of Genesis would have wanted us to think of is he would have wanted us to think of the word preservation. He wants us to think preservation. That's the idea of the tabah. There's no word for this in the Hebrew Old Testament for this idea. And so right off the bat, all he said so far is make yourself an ark. And the idea is it's not what you think. It's not what you think. He tells Moses, make an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. If you know the story of Moses, he says the same thing to his mother when she creates the ark for Moses to preserve his life as a baby when there's danger, when the Pharaoh is killing all the firstborn sons because he's afraid of his kingdom being taken over. He says, when you construct this ark, this tabah, cover it with pitch inside and out. Don't forget that. That's an important detail. Then he says, this is how you are to make it. We get details. I love this. Detailed instructions. The length of the ark is to be 300 cubits. Its breadth is 50 cubits. Its height is 30 cubits. Now, a cubit is about 1.5 feet. Roughly, it's 1.5 feet. So you can see right off the bat, the length of the ark is 6 times its width, and it's 10 times its height. So let's just say theoretically, we were to draw what maybe this ark were to look like. You have all sorts of images in your mind. In fact, we created one for you at the beginning of this series. But there's all sorts of images that come to mind when we think of an ark. But these are the instructions we're given. This is what the ark was to look like. And he's instructed to create a window inside the ark. And some of you would look like, that looks like a banker's box, an extra long banker's box. That doesn't look like the ark that I was thinking of. And it's because you've been conditioned and I've been conditioned to read this through our Western mindset. And when we think of the ark, we think of a boat. Look what Dr. Michael Morales, who's an expert Old Testament scholar, look at what he says about the ark. He says, while popular depictions of the ark often mislead one into viewing it as a boat, the vessel having no sails, no rudder, no oarsman or etc., was no boat. And Noah was no captain steering his own fate. That's not what's going on here. The instructions to build the ark in Genesis 6:13 through 17 utilize 3 times as many verses than for the flood itself, demonstrating the emphasis on the ark itself as the means of deliverance. The ark was meant to be seen, this tabah, as a means of preservation, as a means of deliverance. Morales goes on to say the description of the ark is symbolic, and it's symbolic of a temple. And that was sort of the idea with connecting the tabah to these ancient temples. And I know this is a lot of detail, but just hang with me. This is good. This is brilliant, and this has to do with you, believe it or not. And he's connecting the idea to a temple. The further instructions show this. Look, he says, make a roof for the ark, which these Old Testament temples did, and the ancient temples, and finish it to a cubit above and set the door of the ark on its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. Okay, now, this is the fun part. So there's a roof. This is where we sort of get to kind of use our imagination a little bit. And this is probably more than a cubit above, but it makes for a better drawing. So the truth is he says, make it a roof. And make a roof and set it about a cubit above and put a door on the side. Now, this is, I believe, for ventilation at the top. There was a lot going on inside here. So here's the thing. If we were to split open, we're not gonna put the door in the side because we're gonna cut the ark open. If we were to split the ark open and look inside to see the instructions that were given to us, we would see that the ark had 3 levels in it. So there was a bottom floor, and then there were floors above that, 2 floors above that, to be a lower, he says, a second and a third. And so this is how the ark would have been constructed. It would look something like this. Now, again, this is the artist's interpretation, meaning me. This is sort of, what, just looking at the details, the detail instructions that we're giving in the story, this is what the image is for the first century readers. This is sort of what they would have seen and what they would have imagined this ark to look like. It has these 3 levels, and it's constructed in the ancient temples, by the way. These levels in the temples were to represent the heavens and the earth and the waters. All of these ancient Egyptian temples. And the creation story, just a few pages back, would intentionally echo this, because they would have seen Eden was a sort of temple. And here's why: because a temple is where you commune with God. And when he's describing the ark, he's giving us shadows of the Eden story. Now, again, I know this is a lot. I just need you to hang with me. This is. I know it's more fascinating to me than it is for you, but it's at some point it's going to get really important. This is why we need to understand this in the ancient context, because all this stuff you're going, do I need to know all this? This is what the ancient readers would have been reading into the story. This is what they would have seen. In Genesis chapter 2, when God created Eden, we're told that he creates Eden, this place where he places the man and the woman. And in the east, we're told in Genesis chapter 2, in the east, he creates a garden in Eden. And then there's a third place, there's a middle. He creates, in Eden, in the east, he creates a garden, and then in the middle of the garden, some of you remember the story, he plants 2 trees. And this is the place where God communes with humanity. This is where God, in the middle of the garden, this is where God plants the tree of life. This is where eating from this tree preserves life. And then the tree of knowledge that we talked about last week, the knowledge of Tov and Ra. These are in the middle of the garden. And this is the place where God communed with his people. So fast forward, if we go beyond this in the Bible, and again, remembering that we've dropped in on one story. This is one story, the flood story. It's in a narrative of stories that the people coming out of Egypt much later, these people coming out of slavery, they don't know any of their history. And so the writer of Genesis is trying to help them understand, and they're in the wilderness and they're constructing a tabernacle, this place where they're gonna commune and they're gonna relate to God. And if you've ever seen any drawings of what the tabernacle looks like, the tabernacle, God gave very specific instructions for how the tabernacle would be constructed. And the tabernacle had this sort of outer fence that went around it. And in the tabernacle, there was an outer courts that you could go into. And at the very beginning, when you walk into the outer courts, there was a way to prepare yourself to meet with God, and only certain people could go in the outer courts. And then there was the inner courts. And in the inner courts, there was this place, and it's called the holy place. There was a holy place in this inner court. And then, I don't have room to write this, but there was this place, you may have heard of this. It's called the Holy of Holies. Now, look at the parallel. This is the place where man communes with God, in the middle of the garden, in the Holy of Holies, in these 3 separate things. And a similar layout was true of the permanent temple that God creates in Jerusalem. And so what the author is telling us is that the ark is a symbolic Eden temple. sort of. I made that phrase up, but it's this symbolic Eden temple reflecting ancient sacred spaces, that all these things are similar. And it's significant because this is where the preservation of life happens and communion with God happens. The preservation of life and communion with God. Now, some of you are thinking, okay, that's so interesting, and some of you are thinking, that's boring. Can you get to something that has to do with me? Which is totally understandable, because you're thinking, so what? Here's what the Apostle Paul says. When we get to the other side of Jesus and what Jesus did for us, and he gave his life, and then he sent his Spirit to be inside of us. This is what he says, the Apostle Paul. In 1 Corinthians 6:19, he says, don't you realize that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, who lives in you and was given to you by God? Your body. It's dangerous when you draw people, so I'm not gonna draw you, I'm gonna draw a circle. Your body, we're told. That's you. Your body is a temple where God is present and where he communes with you. God's breath is what gave you life, and his breath in your spirit is what brings you to life, but your body houses that. Ruah of God, the breath of God. And in 1 Thessalonians, Paul says this, he says, now may the God of peace make you holy in every way. May you continue to grow. May you continue to be more like him, following his instructions. And may your whole spirit and soul and body be kept blameless until our Lord Jesus Christ comes. Here's what he's saying. You're complex. You've been told that by your spouse or your ex-spouse or your ex-girlfriend. You're complex, and it's true, you are. The Bible even says that. You're complex in that you have a body, you have a soul, and you have a spirit. Now, don't miss this. This is all talking about you. You were designed in 3 parts with a body and a soul and a spirit. And like the Holy of Holies and like the middle of the garden and like this box that Noah's creating, this is about the preservation of your life. That's what this story is about. And it's about communing with God and the importance of that and how it happens. Your body, as you know, this is the physical nature of you, your actions, the activity of your life. It's what people see on the outside. Your soul is your mind and your will and your emotions. It's what makes you unique. It's your individual consciousness. It's what people experience coming out in your body. It impacts the way in which you live your life. Your mind, will, and emotions shape your actions and your activity of your life. But then there's something that's central to you, and it's your spirit. It's the immaterial life force that brings you to life and sustains you with life. And what the scripture teaches is that's the ruah of God. It's God's spirit in you. He gave you a spirit. He breathed life into your spirit. And this is how we connect with God. Not necessarily with our body or our soul. They relate because these are 3 things, but they're one. They're connected. But in our spirit, your spirit is how you connect with the Spirit of God. And your body is a temple. It's a sacred space where you commune with God. Now, let me ask you this. What if this is the point of the story for us? What if we're meant to think about our lives in this way? See, we get lost in the boat and the flood and the animals. We're gonna get to the animals. We're gonna get to the flood, but even before we get to the flood and the animals, what if this story is about a sacred space, an ark that is your life, that if constructed well could endure life's storms and avoid the catastrophe that many other people find themselves in? Here's the second question I believe this narrative confronts us with. The second question that this narrative confronts us with is this, is whose instructions are constructing our lives? Noah was given very specific instructions. Moses' mom was given very specific instructions for the preservation of life. This is a more invasive question than last week, I understand. Last week is more general. It's like, what is good? Who gets to define what is good? This is more specific than that. This is primarily who's instructing what you're constructing. Whose instructions are constructing your life? Whose instructions are primarily what is how you're following, what specifically you're following your life and how you live your life and how you put together your family and how you put together your relationships and how you build your career, how you're building the right life around you. Here's what's interesting. Noah was given very specific instructions. And this is one of the things I love. He was told to fortify the ark inside and out with this pitch. And so the question for you and for me is, who's fortifying your life inside and out? What are the instructions that are constructing your inner life and your outer life? We're not talking about behavior modification. We're talking about your whole life as a temple of God. Most people read that verse and they think this is about not getting tattoos, which is ridiculous. Like, that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about constructing your life in a way that not only honors God, but it preserves the type of life you were designed to experience. Who's primarily instructing your outer life? Your relationships, your profession, your finances. Who's giving direction? What are the instructions you go to? What are the instructions you're following when it comes to your outer life? Who's instructing your inner life? Your thought life, your emotional health, your mental health, your internal well-being, your personal identity, how you see yourself on the inside. Who's instructing your inner life? Who's informing that? Who's telling you who you are? Who's telling you how you should see yourself and what you should think and what you should pay attention to? And who's instructing your spiritual life? Where are you getting instruction for connection with God and devotion to God and communion? That's what this is about. Where are you getting instruction for communing with God in your spirit? I want to remind you, Jesus came as a rabbi. Some of you, maybe you're new to church and you're like, this is all a lot. Here's the one thing I want you to hear. Jesus came as a rabbi to provide instructions. He discipled his first followers. And they were actually known as followers of the way. This is how you find the way to life, to true life, to meaningful life, to abundant life. Jesus was discipling them in the way that they should go. And those disciples, after Jesus left, they discipled others and they instructed others in the way of Jesus, the way in which Jesus instructed them to live. This is so important. Jesus' teachings addressed and answered life's most complicated questions. It's an instruction manual for how you preserve your life, preserve true life, and commune with God. Now, here's what you need to know. Whomever or whatever you look to for answers to your life's questions is who's discipling you. Whomever or whatever you look to get your questions answered. Whomever or whatever your kids are looking to get their questions answered is who or what is discipling them. The problem in our world today is we have too much information that's too convenient at our fingertips. And we don't take the time to unpack and understand stories like this that have been preserved for thousands of years that are very significant to finding and preserving life in our world. And the problem is that Google and social media and chat and Claude is where we get our information. It's who we're following. It's who's influencing our life. It's the information that we're allowing to inform the way in which we live our lives. It is instructing our lives. Here's the problem. These internet tools are not designed to tell you the truth. They're not. They're designed to keep your attention. That's how the internet companies make money. Do you realize this? Is when they keep your attention. They show you what you want to see and tell you what you want to hear. Why? Because the algorithm is designed to keep you engaged and scrolling and chatting. That's the way it works. And there's a God who wants to connect with you, who wants to instruct you in the way to go. And if we're honest, come on, most of us really don't need more instruction or direction anyway. What we're looking for in those places is we're looking for affirmation. We're looking for encouragement. We're looking for confirmation for the way we want to go. Because we've decided that we want to be the primary instructors of our own lives. We don't want to construct our lives according to somebody else's instructions. It's my life. I'll construct it. I'll build it. I'll do what I want to do with my life. And when that's the case, the responsibility for the outcome is on us as well. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina came ashore. It's one of the flood ideas that comes to mind when we think about a flood like this in the Old Testament. And it was a terrible catastrophe. And the natural thought is, and especially if you're new to church, and I'll just be honest with you, this is a fair question because I think this too. How could God allow something like that? How could a good God allow something like that? And I think that as well. In Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, some of you may have read that. I don't know your thoughts on Jordan Peterson. Don't get sidetracked by that. Here's what he said concerning this disaster, and I thought it was interesting, and I thought it was sobering, and in fact, it gave me information I did not know. Look at what he said. He said, when the hurricane hit New Orleans and the town sank under the waves, was that a natural disaster, is the question he's asking. It's not that no one knew. The Flood Control Act of 1965 mandated improvements in the levee system that held back Lake Pontchartrain, which you know is what failed when the city of New Orleans was flooded because it's under sea level. And this was mandated in 1965. And the system was to be completed by 1978. It gave them 13 years. This federal mandate gave them 13 years to fix the levee system. 40 years later, not 13, not 14, 40. 40 years later, 2005, only 60% of the work had been done. A hurricane is an act of God, Peterson says. But failure to prepare when the necessity for preparation is well known, that's sin. You avoid catastrophe in life by constructing your life according to God's instructions. This story and these stories like this, the stories in Genesis, it helps us to realize that everything other than constructing our lives according to God's instructions it's not only unwise, it's sinning. And some of you think sinning like this is a judgment. Take God out of it for a minute. If you're skeptical or you're new to faith or you're new to Christianity and you're not even sure about this whole story, here's why it's sinning, because it's sinning against future you. You're betraying your own future by following your own limited perspective and your own instructions or the instructions of someone who doesn't have your best, the best in mind for you. God is grieved in the direction that man is going and the way they're constructing their lives. And this is important because the outcome of this is not saving or rescuing or preserving. This didn't depend on Noah. God gave a gift to Noah, a very specific instructions about how to build the ark. And Noah's responsibility was to be obedient. God's responsibility was the outcome. God said, if you'll build the ark according to my instructions, things will go well for you. This is how you'll endure the storm. This is how you'll avoid catastrophe. Noah could not conceive of what he and his family were going to face. Most scholars agree. Noah had no concept of a flood or even heavy rainfall. The author of Hebrews, regarding what Noah did, Noah in the flood story, he says, by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark. Things not yet seen was not merely that floodwaters hadn't started rising yet. This was Noah trusted God about a reality that was beyond his lived experience, beyond of what he could conceive of that was coming. By faith, Noah obeyed God's instructions, and he constructed this ark, this preservation box. We're going to talk about this next week. And it not only saved him, it saved others. There was a much bigger impact of this. See, faith is not acting without information. This faith that the writer of Hebrews is talking about, it's not about acting without information. It's acting without confirmation, though. You get instruction, you get direction, that's the information, but you don't have proof, you don't have evidence, you don't know what's coming. Maybe it's something you can't conceive of. Some of us, like Noah, we sit under clear blue sky. And under clear blue sky, Noah pre-decided he would trust God, even if God's instruction seems absurd to him, to his family, or to others. Now, I've told some of you this story before, and so I'll be brief in this. Some of you know this part of my story. One of the biggest storms I experienced in my life was when I was a senior in high school. I graduated in 92, but in the summer of 1990, the rain started in a heavy way in my life when I received the words, "Dad has cancer." And after about a year or so of surgery and radiation and treatments, all sorts of things, the floodwaters came for us. And one of the stories I draw on is the night that my dad passed. He was struggling at home. He had come home and we had hospice care in our house. And he was struggling, fighting for his life. And my mom was with him. We had already gone to bed. And as he laid there, my mom, I don't know, maybe prompted by God, but just speaking reality over my dad, she said, "Glenn, you have led us and taught us all these years to follow God with our lives, and he will take care of us. We're going to continue to follow him, and we will be okay." And with that, my dad took his last breath. See, this is what faith looks like. Some of you see a storm brewing on the horizon. You're not sure what to do. Maybe it's not up to you. Maybe it's one of those inevitable storms that life brings our way. Jesus, he said we would experience storms. Some of you don't. You're standing under clear blue sky. Everything seems calm and smooth, which in my experience and in the weather experience is usually the calm right before the storm. And I don't wish anything on you, but Jesus warned in this world, we're gonna have trouble. Back here, something broke in the world and there is disaster, there is catastrophe happening in the world. He promised never to wipe out the whole world again. But he did say in the time of Noah, Jesus affirmed this story. And he said there were people living without any concern or worry that trouble was headed their way. And this world has its troubles. So let me ask you one more time. Who gets, wrong question. Whose instructions are constructing your life? Whose instructions are constructing your life? If you knew a storm or another storm was likely, wouldn't you want to be ready? What could you do today to fortify your life inside and out as an ark to withstand life's greatest storms? This is where your faith matters today for what life might bring someday. Let me pray for you. God, I pray for somebody who's here today and Maybe they've chosen to believe in you. And so often we shrink down the good news of the gospel to just believe and you'll be saved one day. But that believing requires trusting, it requires faith. And the truth is Noah believed you. And his beliefs weren't in what he said, they were in what he did. And his belief in you and his following you and following your instructions are what constructed the preservation of life. So God, I pray for somebody who's here today, and as we were talking, there's something in their outer life, in their public life, or something in their inner life, in their private life, that's not honoring you. They know it's not following your instructions, and they know it's not gonna end well. May they recognize today that at some point, the flood waters will come. That choosing today under clear blue sky to construct their life according to your instructions is not just the safest. It's the way to find a maximum amount of life in this life. And so I just pray you give us the wisdom to know what to do with what we heard today and all this, and you give us the courage to take steps to follow you in it. And I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.